Part 2. Echoes begin to gather. The chipped yellow mug warmed Clara's hands, a heat that felt less her own, more conducted, as if the ceramic held a miniature receiver, drawing a signal from somewhere beyond the kitchen, not observed by someone, but through a subtle vibration against her palms. The cheer of the yellow felt brittle now, a forced bloom against the gray of the morning. Caleb had preferred the stark white, declaring yellow too cheerful for serious contemplation. And the memory tasted like ash on her tongue. At work, designing a brochure for Meadowbrook Farm, the echoes multiplied. Ben, the account manager, usually all brisk angles and efficiency, paused, his tie slightly askew, and said, "A bit melancholic for such sunshine, don't you think?" The words were Caleb's precisely, resurrected. Ben didn't habitually comment on atmospheric mood. His aesthetic leaned toward spreadsheets and sales projections. Clara nodded, sketching sunflowers whose faces seemed to droop not from weight, but from expectation. Each petal felt sculpted by a familiar hand, mirroring a preference she hadn't consciously chosen herself. She began actively listening, hunting for these linguistic ghosts. It was like tuning a radio between stations, searching for interference in the smooth broadcast of everyday speech. A barista complimented her scarf. "Very sparrow-like. Suits you." The compliment settled like a tiny stone in her chest. Sparrow, Caleb's ridiculous endearment. Born on a morning when frost had coated the park in silver dust and she'd huddled deeper into her coat. She forced a smile, the muscles tightening around her jawbone as she scribbled it down. Sparrow. The list grew with each passing hour. Gentle correction. A bit melancholic. Now sparrow-like. It wasn't merely the phrases. It was the subtle inflection. The same quiet certainty Caleb used when dismantling her arguments, leaving her feeling elegantly disarmed. The grocery store offered further fuel for her burgeoning unease. Reaching for Earl Grey, another legacy of Caleb's insistence. The cashier, a woman whose name tag read Doris, and whose eyes held the weariness of 1,000 scanned items, remarked, "Just like you always do. Good choice. Always." Clara had only been consistently choosing Earl Grey for 2 years, since he had introduced her to its bergamot scent and subtle bite. Doris didn't notice Clara's slight flinch. She simply scanned the box and moved on to the next customer, leaving Clara feeling like an exhibit in a carefully curated museum of Caleb's tastes. Doris wore sensible shoes and a floral apron. She wasn't supposed to know about Clara's tea preferences, or anything beyond what was visible at first glance. Her internal monologue started weaving itself into objective observation. The sunlight streaming through the bus window felt less golden now, more like an interrogation lamp illuminating her vulnerabilities. She remembered Caleb teasing her sensitivity. "You read too much into things, Sparrow," he'd say with that condescending smile that suggested she was adorably quaint for it. Was he right? Was she simply prone to pattern seeking, assigning meaning where none existed? Or was this something more pervasive? The city itself seemed to be breathing with his influence, each face potentially echoing his judgments, each conversation subtly orchestrated. Time stretched and contracted strangely. Moments pulsed with familiarity like half-remembered dreams. Flashbacks flickered. Caleb on their first date commenting on the melancholy beauty of a cloudy day. Caleb praising her scarf as perfectly sparrow-like after she'd initially disliked it. Caleb guiding her hand towards the Earl Grey on the supermarket shelf, each moment now overlaid with a faint layer of suspicion. Like sepia tones bleeding into color photographs, they hadn't been intimate moments so much as data points collected and cataloged by an attentive observer, an inventory of preferences meticulously compiled. She found herself lingering longer in conversations than necessary, fishing for echoes with subtle questions. What do you think about rainy days? Do you have a favorite kind of tea? Each answer felt like another turn of the screw in a tightening labyrinth of her mind. It wasn't necessarily that people were wrong. It was that they were too aligned, too effortlessly mirroring Caleb's preferences, as if they had been briefed beforehand on what Clara liked, or should like, based on his influence. Her body registered it too. A persistent tremor in her left hand when reaching for objects. A tightness in her jaw that made chewing uncomfortable. The metallic tang of anxiety coating her tongue each time she heard another echo. She tested it deliberately today, choosing lavender tea instead of Earl Grey, wearing a scarlet scarf instead of her usual muted blues. But even these deviations felt predetermined somehow. The cashier at lunchtime barely glanced at the lavender box before remarking, "A little adventurous today," as if lavender was outside of Clara's established range. The world felt less solid now, more like a stage set where everyone knew their lines except her, a collective performance built on shared references and borrowed tastes. With Caleb's ghost conducting an orchestra of subtle resonances from offstage, the music swelled around her, seemingly innocuous notes building to create an unsettling harmony. Her own life becoming increasingly familiar yet subtly alienating.